welcome, Ben. Ben is going to introduce himself, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how he got involved in photography. But I'm really excited about this because it is beginner photography, so everyone should be able to learn a little bit about finding beauty in everyday objects and taking a photo of it. So take it away, Ben.
Hi, yes. So I'm Ben Kesselman. I'm 17 or turned 17 in a few days. I'm from Wilton, Connecticut. And I got started in photography pretty informally. My dad shoots a lot of photos. He'll do it for like sports events and just general family things. And so he's kind of the photography guy in our family. And I picked up one of his old cameras one day, started taking photos in the backyard, kind of everywhere, and had some fun with it. And then I ended up doing some photography for my aunt at a UN event, and kind of got into it from there. And ever since then, it's kind of just been a fun hobby, a good pastime, and a good way to stay entertained, especially now during quarantine. And so this is about finding beauty in everyday objects and things within our house without having to go into nature and the outdoors and having to worry about violating our social distancing. So this is kind of an introduction to photography. So what we're going to do throughout this, we're going to start with introductions. I already introduced myself. Everyone else can introduce themselves. Then we'll go into some photography techniques. Things we'll talk about: rule of thirds, leading lines, filling the frame, and lighting. Then we're going to talk about taking our own photos, and we are going to actually take our own photos. And then at the end, we're going to pull our photos up on the screen, and then we're going to talk about what we chose to take photos of, why, and how we use some of the techniques that we talked about in the class. So for starters, with introductions, I already introduced myself, but if we could, I'd like for everyone else, because this is a pretty small group, to just go around, say your name, where you're from, and just some kind of things that you've done to either hobbies, fun facts about yourself, or what you've been doing to try and cure the boredom and stay entertained during this quarantine. So let's start with, let's see, Alvador, you already have your mic on, so why don't we start with your introduction? Would anyone like to start off the introduction and just say who they are, kind of a fun fact about themselves, where they're from, something like that?
Oh, okay. So I just joined. I'm Avidor, part of the Mentor Project, and I'm from Israel.
You're from Israel, wow, okay. How's quarantine in Israel? Is it much different from what we're doing in the United States, or do you know much about that?
I think it's the same. And today there are new regulations here. So basically, we can't go out from our houses. Or we can go out, but only to a distance of 100 meters, which I think is what is it in 100 meters from house, and that's it. So it's wow. Basically quarantine, full quarantine.
Yeah, it seems a bit stricter than what we have here. I know I could still go for runs and bike rides and stuff as long as I maintain a distance from other people. How about, we don't have a name up, but Verizon's iPhone. Would you like to introduce yourself? It's okay if you don't want to. All right, if no one else, oh. I see your mic just got unmuted, but I can't hear anything. Are you saying something? Okay. All right, if no one else wants to introduce themselves, I'm gonna start moving on to the rest of the presentation. Feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions or comments. This can be a little bit interactive throughout the whole thing. Try and keep a good dialogue, especially since it's a small group. I don't want to kind of just make it a strict lecture here. But let's go into the first thing. So one of the photography techniques is the rule of thirds. And it's pretty self-explanatory. You're dividing everything in the photo into thirds. So think of it, you have this image, it's kind of like a big tic-tac-toe board. And when you're taking a photo, when you're framing something within the frame, you want to think about this grid here. And what we're looking for is these four corners in the center, the intersections of all the lines. For a lot of photos, especially when you're taking photos of a person, like we have right now with the way my camera is set up, I'm right in the center of the photo because I'm the subject of the photo. It's the one thing that you want to see. But when we're taking photos of different objects or of landscape settings or of anything, of any different subject, a lot of times the photos look best when they're placed, when the subject is placed in one of these four corners at the intersections of the line. So here are some examples. Here's two photos of the same exact object. On the left, we see that this object, this little hill here, is placed a little bit to the right and kind of in the middle. So it's straddling the two points on the right here that I'm highlighting now. Whereas with the photo on the right, it's smack dab in the center and it's kind of high on the top. And then we also have all these other rocks and this greenery in the very bottom that goes across the photo. So it's kind of hard to tell where exactly in the image the subject is. It's kind of all over the place. Whereas with the one on the left, you see this big object, and you could also see, because it's kind of to the right there, kind of in the middle, you could see a lot of the sky in the background. You could see the horizon as it stretches across to the left, and you could see the ocean right in front of it. So it's a lot more dynamic. We have the subject is a lot more isolated in the photo. So overall, we have a much more visually appealing photo. Here are some other great examples of it. Right here, the ship is placed to the right of the photo. It's in kind of the same position. And one thing that's important to notice is where the ship is pointed. We see that the ship is going to the left of the photo. And so you could place this in the same exact position on the very left side of the photo, but then what we see is that the ship would just be going right out of the frame if we think about it as a moving object. What the photographer did here is they placed it on the right, so we have this appearance of motion. It seems a lot more dynamic as a photo because the ship is going to move across the plane all the way over to the left. So we have that kind of appearance of movement. And another important thing, the reason that it's off to the right there instead of right in the center of the photo is because we have that beautiful sunset in the background. You could see that stretching horizon, and same thing as the last photo, and you could see the sunset right there, and it makes for a vast photo, and we could see all the different parts without compromising the integrity of the subject, which is the ship, as the centerpiece of the photo. So then if we go into this next photo, what we see is we can see that this castle here in Mount Artos is the subject of the photo. It's off to the left, it's a little bit down, it's in those intersection points there. And so we see it in the front of the photo, it pops out, it's that one unique color, it's the man-made object there. But what we also see is we see those big mountains in the background. If we put that castle right in the center of the photo, then it would be covering a lot of the mountains. And so you could kind of get an idea what the picture looks like, but what would happen is you wouldn't be able to see the water because these two sides of the river, or the two sides of the body of water, are going to be sandwiched in front of each other. And we don't get that perspective of the depth and the different things in the photo. It all kind of gets blended into one thing, and we can't really tell what's going on. But because we're using the rule of thirds, because we're putting it over to the left in those intersecting points of the grid, we have a much more appealing photo that really encompasses the vastness of this landscape and the thing that we're trying to take a photo of. And we can also do it besides just these landscapes where you have it in the left or the right. We could use it in all kinds of settings. Right here on the left, we have this rock climber that's in that top left corner there, that's in the intersection point of the photo. And we could see him hanging down. We could see that he's the subject of the photo, but we also have, in another part of the rule of thirds, we have all those houses and everything at the very bottom of the cliff. So we can really see everything that's going on. And it helps give us an idea of the height and how crazy it is that he's on top of this mountain. If we didn't have that, what we'd see is we'd have this climber right in the center of the photo, it'd be zoomed in, and we'd have the sky that was all around the back of it. And we wouldn't really have any perspective for where this is taking place, how high the mountain is, or what the landscape looks like around him. But because we're using the rule of thirds, we can. And the same thing, because we're talking about finding the beauty in everyday objects and things in our house, what we have on the right is a great example of a still life. We have just these seemingly benign or mundane objects. We have a carton of milk and a glass, we have some cookies and a book, but what we have is that they're placed in the lower right part of the photo. And then we have that nice wood background in the back. And because we're using the rule of thirds, it looks very visually appealing. You have the straight lines of the glasses going up, and you have the book and everything nicely sandwiched in the corner there to help create a great photo. So now let's move on. Are there any questions about the rule of thirds before I move on to another technique? All right, so that's just a great thing to think about, is where in the frame are you putting your object? So let's talk about leading lines. So with leading lines, let's look at some great landscape photos. I know we're talking about everyday objects, but these are good starting points, because what we see is that when you look at the image, if you had no leading lines, you'd see a ton of, in the left, you'd see a ton of buildings, in the right, you see a ton of mountains. But your eye wants to have some direction in the photo. Your eye wants to be led to a certain point in the photo of here's the main thing in this photo. So on the left, we have these cool streaking lines where the photographer left the camera taking a photo for multiple seconds, that you see the tracking of these lines on the road from the cars, or I believe it's a train in this case. And it leads you through the photo, because you have these really cool buildings. They're well lit, there's a lot of reflections of the light, but if we didn't have these lines streaking through the photo like that, it would be a lot to take in. You'd see all these colorful buildings and they'd all be jumping at your face in this image. So you don't actually really know what's going on. But same thing for the right. If we have all these mountains here that are just right in front of you, you could kind of get an idea of what it looks like, and it might be cool. But because we have this river flowing through the mountains, what you have is the mountains are converging on the river as you go through. You get a really good sense of the depth and the vastness of this landscape. And so here's some arrows just pointing it out. We start off with this really broad or this really wide leading line. And as we go through the photo, it's narrowing and it's narrowing and it's getting smaller. So this gives that appearance of depth. If you've ever drawn on a piece of paper and you've tried to draw a hallway or something, you start out with a big square, you make a smaller square, and then you connect the lines going through and they slowly taper off to give it that effective depth. And the same thing can be used in photos, because even though you get the 3D aspects of photos, these leading lines really help that to stand out. And in the context of taking photos of everyday objects, it's important to note that these leading lines don't have to be vast and huge like these rivers and these roads that are going through the photos that I already showed you. They could be very shallow and they could be very subtle. So here on the left, we have what looks like some kind of cautionary bar, and you have this, this tube, it looks like a vacuum tube or something, that's wrapped around this bar. But what you'll notice is that it's all kind of flowing to the right of the image. You have these striped black and yellow lines that are each kind of sliding down towards the right. And the same thing with this wrapping tube. You have this sense of flow, the sense of dynamism, as it's all shifting to the right of the photo. So even though it's a very shallow photo, you still get the sense of life and motion, because everything's kind of fluid, everything's moving and leading your eye to one direction. And that's especially so with the photo on the right. I don't know if there we go, let me try and move that. So what we see is we have these spiraling staircases, and it's the same concept as the river. With each triangle that's made that staircase, it gets smaller and smaller. So you get the sense that there are many flights of stairs. They're all leading to that, to the sky, to the window there at the top that lets you see out to the sky. So it really guides your eyes through the image, as opposed to having this giant yellow blob of stairs, which might be a lot to take in and might not be very visually appealing. And so here are two different photos that I've taken. And if anyone would like to talk about the leading lines or try and take a shot at what makes one photo better than the other, try and explain it, that'd be great. Would anyone like to try and take a shot at it?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Is the one on the left, is that one the better one because you can see all the mountains?
Yeah, so if we want to look at it in terms of the rule of thirds, right, we have that tree that's kind of there in the bottom. It's not right in the center. So that's very good. And we do have the mountains that are kind of at the top there. So everything is split well into the rule of thirds. But if you were to look at the photo on the right, what we would see is we have this road that kind of guides you through the photo. So the trees are off to the left a little bit. They're still following the rule of thirds. So they're not right in the front of the photo. They don't jump out at you. They're an object that guides you to the mountains, which is the subject of the photo. So they're both good photos, but I would actually think that the one on the right might be a better example of using leading lines to try and guide you to the mountains.
All right, thank you.
Can I get your name? I didn't get it during.
My name is Aiden.
Aiden?
Sorry, my mic wasn't working earlier. I was like trying to put it on, but it just, I don't know. I guess.
No, that's all right. Can you give us a little introduction? Where are you from?
Yeah, so I'm from Great Neck, Long Island. I'm in 9th grade. Yeah, anything else you need to know, or
Fun facts, hobby, anything?
I like to play baseball.
Okay, cool. It's unfortunate. Sorry that your season right now is getting so delayed.
Yeah. There's nothing I can do about it, so it's all right.
Yeah, hopefully it's not canceled. But all right,
Yeah.
Let's move on to a concept called filling the frame. And so with filling the frame, there's a few different things I'm going to touch on. I'm going to touch on the positioning of the object within the frame a little differently from the rule of thirds. I'm also going to talk about using the foreground and background of the image. So first, here's just two examples of a photo that I made up with a cartoon. But you would see on the left, I'd hope that you see this, is you can't really see all of the bird. A lot of it's cropped out in the image. So you get the context, you get some great detail on the bird, but it might be a little too huge. And this is a very, very oversimplified version of this. On the right, you see that the bird's very small and you have all this white space in the back of it. So it makes you wonder, how well am I utilizing all of this frame? How well am I using the background and filling it with the subject to make it the centerpiece of the photo? So here's a great example of that. We see this dragonfly. It's very zoomed in, so you can see all the cool detail of the dragonfly. And what the photographer did here is they decided, well, a dragonfly is symmetrical. It's going to look exactly the same on both sides. So why do we need to show all of it in this one photo? So what they did is, instead of just zooming in so that the dragonfly is the center of the photo, maybe flipping the photo out the other direction to fit it all in, they cropped out half of it and they zoomed in to get all this cool detail. So you have plenty of white space in the background, but you could clearly tell that it's a dragonfly. You could easily imagine the other half of it, and you get all the good detail that you might not get if you were zoomed out fitting it in the frame. So when you're thinking about different objects in that sense, if you're taking something around your house, you might decide, and might take a liberty and say, hey, I don't need all of this. If you're using a plate or fruits in your photo, you might say, I want to put this in the bottom corner. I don't need all of the plate. We know it's round. Our brains could subconsciously fill in the rest of this image. And so I'll just capture the good parts of it and get in really close so I could see all that detail. And the same thing here with these two planes. On the left, what we see is the plane's very small. You can see the streaking of the plane from the left to the right of the photo. You're using the rule of thirds, which is great because it's right there in the right third of the image, and it's kind of in the middle. But the plane is very small. And you might say, well, I don't really know much about this plane. I can't see a ton of it, so what's the point? But it actually is great because what they're doing is they're making the plane very small to give you perspective. You can see, you can't really tell because of the sky how huge it is because you don't have anything to gauge the size of those clouds, but you could tell that it's very high up because you have the sky right above it, but you have this very small plane. So it makes you feel like you're a person on the ground looking up at that plane. Whereas on the right, we have a very different photo of a plane. You can't really get that perspective of how small it is in the sky because the sky is very monochromatic. It's kind of washed out, but we get a great sense of the detail of this plane. It's not like the commercial plane on the left. It's an older plane and it's a Navy plane. So there's a lot of cool details. You could see the propeller spinning. You could see the two different wings on top of each other. You could even see that the two pilots there are wearing headphones and sunglasses. So you really get a great sense of the detail, and it helps you imagine the plane and visualize the plane. And so that's the purpose of that image. If they were to take it on the left, you'd understand how small it is and how high up in the sky it is, but you really wouldn't get a sense of the great detail that makes this plane so cool to look at. And here are just a couple close-up images of that. We could kind of skip through here, see them better. And then let's talk about foreground and background. So besides what we've been talking about with just having the subject right there in the photo and how to frame the subject and how big we want it, where in the frame we want it to make it look good, we have to think about everything else that's around the subject. So there are two parts, or three parts mainly to a photo. You have the subject, which in this case would be the bird. You have the foreground, which is the front of the photo. The subject could be in the foreground, like right where I am, or the background, which in my case for this video would be the wall back here. And so you could take liberties and decide whether you want your subject to be in the foreground or the background, whether you want other objects to be in the foreground and background, and how you could use that to kind of create a certain context to your photo to demonstrate a certain message in your photo. So let's start by looking at the foreground. So here on the left photo, what we have is the subject of the photo is clearly the woman. It's probably her eye. That's the one thing that pops out because the white of her eye is the brightest color. But to add some context to the photo to make it look cool, what the photographer did is they decided to put leaves in the front of the photo. So the subject is actually taking up most of the background because her hair covers that blank space on the right side there. So we don't actually see anything that's behind her. So she is the background, and the foreground are the leaves. And what that does is it kind of draws your eye to, or draws your eye to her eye, and it creates some interesting context for the photo. And the same thing for the photo on the right. We can imagine that whatever is behind there is probably a city street. You might have a taxi with the yellow light. You could have some storefronts showing their lights in their advertisements. It could be a large number of things. But what the photographer did in this case is they occupied the foreground by having a window there that has a lot of water on it. So you can't really see what's going on in the background. And you also don't really have a subject to this photo. All you have is the blurry background and then the foreground, and that helps create an interesting photo. What the purpose of this photo might be is a little ambiguous, because it could be some kind of background image, something you might throw up on your laptop or your phone, but it's interesting nonetheless, because your brain can imagine what's behind it, but in the actual image, the window in the water there is kind of covering up what you intend to look at. So then let's go on to the background here. We'll start with the left. So here on the left, we see that the one thing that's actually in focus besides her hand is the watch. So that's the one thing that the photographer wants you to look at the most. It's very bright and it pops out. It's the subject of the photo. And it's also using the rule of thirds, which most of these photos do, because they're very well taken. But what you see in the background here is you see some kind of movement. You see another subject, which is the female in this case, and she's kind of blurred out so that she doesn't pop out, and she doesn't create any kind of conflict or clash with the watch, because when you see the photo, the first thing your eye goes to is either her hand or the watch, which shows that kind of movement of her throwing it up. But she's still there to create context, to create a sense of motion, and it gives some life to the watch because it's something that a human would own, a human would use, that she would use. So it creates some kind of life, and it creates some kind of purpose for the fact that this watch isn't just something that's sitting there frozen in the air. It's something that's being tossed up. It creates life in the photo. And then if we move to this other photo, what we see is the background is very dark. There's really nothing to look at there. And the photographer in this case did that on purpose because they wanted to highlight the oranges. Why they took photos of oranges, not quite sure. That's their decision. But it is a cool photo nonetheless, because you have the contrast of the black in the background contrasting with, or you have the black in the background contrasting with the bright orange of the mesh bag and the oranges in the front. And so what the background is actually doing in this case is, by being what we call negative space, where there's not actually anything there, it's just darker, it's monochromatic, there's nothing to look at. By being negative space, it creates more emphasis on the thing that's in the front, which is, I believe it's a woman in this case, holding the oranges. So it's a great way to highlight the object and to take a more objective view of what is this thing that we're looking at, as opposed to the photo on the left here, which is more telling a story or creating a sense of action. The middle one is more a shot frozen in time. But if we look at the right here, what we see is everything's kind of in focus. We can see very clearly, it's kind of far away, but we could see all the houses. We could see the mountains in the distance. We could kind of see the sun setting behind the mountains, but we could also very clearly see all the plants and everything that are in the front. And so what this does is, it's not highlighting any subject in particular. It's making you feel as if you're someone who's hiking through the mountains. You just came over that hill, just at the precipice, and now you see through the trees. You see this beautiful little town on some coastline that's built up on the mountain. So you kind of get a context for everything in the photo. And by using the background here and the foreground, what they're doing is they're highlighting each thing separately. It guides your eye through the photo. You start with that outline there that's framing the background, which is the plants. They're not anything particular to look at, except for the fact that they're showing that you should look through them at the background here, and it's highlighting all the bright colors of the houses in contrast to those plants. So an interesting way to think about the background in very large contrast with something like this plain background that's used in the middle image. Any questions so far, comments, thoughts? No? Okay. So then let's move on to our last subject here, which is lighting. So in talking about lighting, let's look at some examples and hope some people can make comments. When you look at this photo, first we see what we talked about with the background. We have that very bright yellow background that's kind of highlighting the pineapple. They're using similar colors to create a context to it. But what are some thoughts or some emotions that you think of when you see this brightly lit pineapple with this neon yellow background here? Feel free to.
I feel like the colors just pop out at me, like it really stands out, and I feel like the pineapple doesn't pop out as much because the background is like a brighter color as opposed to the one with the oranges, because the background was black and then the orange popped out. But I still think it's a pretty cool picture.
Right. what kind of emotions or things do you think of in association with a photo like this?
I think of like a tropical aspect, I guess. Like a happy because it's like nice bright colors, not like dark or gloomy or anything.
Right, exactly. So that's really important that you said that, the happy, and it's not dark colors. You're using the lighting in this case to have a very bright background. You have this kind of this lighthearted subject, which is a pineapple wearing sunglasses. It kind of feels like funky human or something. And
Yeah.
so they're using the lighting in this case to create this mood that's associated with the photo. I don't think anyone's going to see this photo and say, wow, that makes me really depressed, unless they're really jealous that they can't have pineapple or something like that. But overall, it invokes a sense of happiness. In contrast, if we look at this, what does this make us feel? I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but
Yeah. I guess like kind of the opposite. It's just like leaves, like I guess it's like the fall leaves turning different colors, and then in the background blackness, which I guess kind of represents like are those leaves supposed to be like changing color and dying or no?
it looks like that to me. It looks like they're kind of willowing out there and
Yeah, so maybe it's
dying
like
from fall.
this picture is not really happy, I guess, to represent something like death, I guess. I don't want to go that far, but maybe something like
No, that's completely fair. And I think that's what I thought of too, is when you have this really dark background, there's not a ton of light, and the only light is, it's just enough light to make it very clear what you're seeing, which is the subject of these leaves. It creates that sense of fall, where all these leaves are dying. They're going to end up falling to the ground. It's a much darker photo than the one before it, emotionally and literally. I wouldn't necessarily say that's a depressing photo, but it definitely invokes much darker emotions. And so that's one important thing to look at, is when you're taking a photo, which we're going to do later, how bright do you want it? What colors do you want in your background? Do you want your background to be something that complements the object? Do you want it to be a happy object, or something that you want to show as like spring and fruitfulness? Do you want to have that bright color in the background, or do you want to make it dark and have that contrast, or use a dark subject in the dark background and dark lighting to try and create that certain story, or that kind of message? But there are other ways that we could use lighting besides just light and dark and the colors that we're actually choosing. One way is you could literally use lights. I know a lot of kids right now, it's some kind of trend. They have these lights that they'll hang up in their room that can change colors. So that's what we kind of see on the left here. It makes you think of like the open signs at a store. What you could do is you could hold certain lights up to your object and change the color and create some kind of emotion. So with this red and blue, you have, it's not necessarily, I don't know that I'd say that it's sad, but it creates this kind of depth to the photo that you don't have if you're just taking the still photo of the person. You're creating some kind of emotions there by mixing the two colors. You create the purple background, you divide the face in two, and it overall creates a really interesting photo just by taking lights that you might have around their house and holding it up near the subject. Same thing on the right here. What we see is we have this person who's holding this ball of lights. If they didn't have it, their face would be very dark, and they might look more like a silhouette compared to the dark background that they have behind them, which is very blurred out. But they have these lights which illuminate their face and makes the subject pop out from the image, and it creates this really cool effect that look like stars or something that are kind of popping out in the front of the image that match the blurred lights in the background that create that kind of circular look in the photo. So it ties the whole photo together, and it also highlights the subject, which is a really cool use of everyday lights, like Christmas lights in your own house, that you could use to take a cool photo.
Ben, we have a question from the chat box.
Sure.
It is, hi, this is super helpful. Can you show us tools to use on the iPhone?
Sure. I'll just finish up the lighting here, and then we will go into that, because there's one more slide, I believe, in lighting. So here's another example. Oh, here's another example of lighting. This is not using lights like we did in the last one. This is just finding natural lighting in your house. I know it's still daylight out where I am. I don't know how it is in Israel, but you could make cool use of the shadows. And so you have on the left here, you have kind of a bland wall. It's a nice yellow, but overall it's not that exciting. what they did when they're taking photos with their phone or with whatever camera they're using is you have this cool light that that's shooting across it, and that's kind of bringing some life to the photo. It brings some motion and it adds some color to it. Same thing on the right. What they're doing is they're using a sheet and they're holding it up over them so that when the light shines through, you could see the pattern of the sheet that shows on their face. You could do the same thing with the blinds or your shades, where you see, kind of on the left here, where you see that dark line right in the middle of this light. If you stand next to the shades while the sun is shining through, you could get all those lines that go across your face, streaking across your face, and they can make for really interesting photos. So to answer your question now, I'm gonna go into my camera and try and pull up some interesting things that you could do. So firstly, if you're using an iPhone, I don't know too much about other phones, but if you have a newer phone, you could use what's called portrait mode, which it kind of mirrors the effects that you could use with actual DSLR cameras or the bigger cameras of blurring out the background. So what you do is you just scroll over to portrait mode there, and you could scroll through a bunch of different effects. So you could use what's called natural light, which is where it's gonna just look like this, but it's gonna blur out the background a lot. So it won't necessarily matter as much with something like my wall here, but if you're outside and you're by a bunch of trees or something, it'll make the trees look blurry, and it'll make the subject stand out and be a lot more in focus. So that's gonna kind of mirror the effect here that we see on the right with the person holding lights, where the city behind them, everything's really blurry. You could kind of tell what's going on, but it's very unclear. Same thing with other things in portrait mode that you could use, but it'll actually change the lighting. So studio light, what that'll do is that'll darken the background and make it look like you're just taking some kind of headshot. And there's other lights like stage light, which is going to show a bright light just as if you're standing on a stage, and it's that bright projector light right in your face. You could have contour light, which is going to add a lot of contrast to your photo. It's going to make shadows pop out and different facial shapes pop out, and cool stuff like that. And stage light mono, which is the same thing as stage light, it's just black and white. Another thing that you could use on pretty much any phone that'll have it is the panorama thing, the panorama effect, which is really cool. So a lot of things that you'll see people do with it is it looks like this. It's hard to hold it up there. You take a photo and you slowly move your phone across the room, and so it'll make one really long continuous photo. So if you're at, say, like a beach or the mountains or something, you could take a really cool photo like that that shows the entire horizon. And if you wanted to, what you could do is you could have someone stand in the photo, you could go by them, and then you could have them really quickly run across and do another thing and another thing. So in the span of one photo, without any editing whatsoever, you could have the same person many times in the photo, which could be really cool. Another thing that you could do with this that people don't often do, that I don't see, is you could determine how long the photo is. You can make it really long, or you can make it kind of short. So if you wanted to take photos, if you have like someone on top of a staircase or something, you could turn it vertically and you could go up the stairs a little bit. So what that does is it kind of creates this cool warp effect as you look up the stairs, and they're kind of curving to lead to the one subject. So it's not a huge photo, it's not going to be really long, but you get this cool effect of depth that'll highlight the subject in a unique way to your normal photos. You could also, when you're going in and actually editing a photo, let me just take a random photo here. I'll take a photo of the computer. I'll go in and I'll click edit just at the bottom there. You can kind of play around with it. You could do a lot of effects with lighting. If you wanted to, you could change the contrast. You could add different color filters. So what you'll see with like the person on the right here, that's not a natural photo. What they did to make that person pop out even more is they're going to scroll through the filters here, and they're going to find one that makes their face contrast and stand out even more. And you could do all kinds of stuff with that if you scroll through. There's lots of cool effects that can make the photo look very different. It could try and blur out the background. It could blur the edges and make more focus on the center. You could also crop it and take things at cool angles. There's a lot of things if you just scroll through the photo editing settings built into your phone that you could make a lot of really cool effects with just the phone on your camera. And if you wanted to go even further, you could download a lot of editing apps and try and find something cool with that. So I hope that answers your question. Is that good? All right, so unless I hear another chat, let's try and move on to the next part here. So taking your own photos. So now what I want to do, we have about 19 minutes left or so. I want to try and get everyone, if you have a phone or an iPad or something else you could take photos on besides what you're filming on, which I'll explain why later, to try and take your own photos. I say we'll give it like 5 to 10 minutes, something around there, to take your own photos, go out, find something within your home to try and use these techniques, so we could talk about how we use these techniques, what we chose, and why we think that this photo is important. So a lot of these are geared towards younger kids because that was the purpose of this presentation, but these are something that we could all do, especially during quarantine, to when we're taking these photos in the next 10 minutes, or if you have even more time, that we could try and use to make the best of our photography skills. So the first one is what I call the name game. So take your name, and we both have A's here, Avador and Aiden, but take the first letter of your name, find an object, find a subject that's in your house, and try and take a photo of that. And along the same line, we can do using your ABCs, which is if you have more time, which we can't do in these 10 minutes, go through every letter of the alphabet and take a photo where the subject of that photo or the background or something in that photo starts with that letter in the alphabet. So you'll end up having 26 different photos that you have to challenge yourself to try and find something cool, some interesting photo that you could take using that letter. Also, storytelling, which we could do here quickly, is either take one photo or take a handful of photos of one kind of object or something, an inanimate object, and try and tell a story with it. Try and take
Ben?
something, yeah.
We have a quick question. Someone is
Sure.
asking, can you just repeat that? They didn't quite understand the instructions. Were you asking the person to go find something that begins with the letter of their name and take a picture of it?
Yeah, so yeah, we'll do that in a couple minutes, but yeah, that's one of the challenges that you could do for the name game is you could, whatever your name is, take the first letter of your name and go try and find an object that starts with that letter. And you could do all kinds of things. You could get creative with it, but these are just some ideas to help entertain yourself while we're in quarantine. Same thing for the ABCs, whatever letter, go through the entire alphabet and take photos of objects that start with that letter. But then for storytelling, what you could do is you could choose one object and you could put it in different backgrounds. You can manipulate it and change where in the photo you put it or what kind of lighting you put in it and try and tell a story. You could either do this with one photo using the rule of thirds and stuff like that to try and create motion and make it seem like that object is going through something that you could then write a story about or explain a story about, or you could take a series of photos of one object in different settings and try and create a story that has some kind of action, that has some kind of plot, but is at the end of the day a series of photos, which are still moments of time that you're kind of putting together to create this idea of motion and life that you could tell through a story. Same thing with scavenger hunt. If you want to play this with other people, you could each make a list of a bunch of different things that they need to take photos of, or a bunch of different places that they need to take photos of, and you could give them an object, and you could say, all right, you have this amount of time. Let's see who could get the most photos of these different objects and who could check off the list. So say I write a list of 20 things that you need to take photos of, or 20 places that you need to take photos of, and you do the same for me, and we could have a race to see who could take the best photos in that amount of time of all these things, who could get it done the fastest. So those are just some things that we could do to think about in the next few minutes when we're taking our photos. But you don't have to do any of these. If you just want to take a photo, if there's something that you think would be cool to take a photo of, just do that. But we're going to take, I'd say, the next like 7 minutes we'll do. So we'll come back at 3:52. Why doesn't everyone, if they can, take out a phone, take out an iPad or something, and go try and find a photo or find a subject in your house, put it in a cool background, try and take a few photos if you can, and then we'll come back at the end of that at 3:52, and then we'll talk about what we took photos of, how we use the different techniques, and then we'll share with each other and kind of discuss them. So does everyone have something that they could take photos of with, or rather, does anyone not have anything that they could take photos of with? Because we're going to have to hold it up to our screen at the end so that we could all see it like this. Is there anyone that doesn't have something like that? Okay, so that sounds promising. So why don't we all come back at 3:52 with either one photo or a few photos preferably. And then we could talk about what we took photos of and how we used the different techniques. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I'll do that now.
Sounds great.
Yes. Okay.
So I should do something that starts with the letter A, right?
If you want to, you could do that, or you could just, if there's anything in your house that you think is cool you want to take photos of, you could do that too. But it's up to you. These are just some things that you can, if you want, that you could follow to try and
Okay.
take photos. And feel free to take multiple. If we have time, we'll go through all of them.
All right. Thank you.
Yep, sounds great. All right, we'll be back at 3:52 then. I'll be on here. I'm not going to hang up, but I'm going to turn off my camera and audio for the few minutes and take photos too. Is everyone back yet?
Yeah, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. All right. Did you get any photos? Did you get any photos?
Yeah,
Aiden?
I took some photos of an apple.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
what we're
yeah.
gonna try and do, because just what you're gonna try and do, if you can, pull up the photo and just, if you could see what I'm doing, hold up the phone like, or whatever you took the photos on, like this to the
Okay,
camera.
I click the start video thing, right? On the bottom?
Yeah.
All right, let me go do that.
Let me know if you're having trouble with it or anything. Oh, it says it's
All right.
okay. There we
I
go.
Alright.
think he was having trouble. He's just back on now.
Oh, Aiden, I didn't. Okay,
That's a,
I didn't process this. We went to Renaissance.
well,
Yes. Okay.
yeah.
Should have mentioned that.
So
All right.
that's one photo that I got.
Is that so? Talk to me about what you're doing there.
So I got
Can you flip it sideways so that I can see the whole thing?
hold
Or
on, yeah. Let me just go sit down.
your phone or something.
Yeah. So I got I did that. So I got like an apple and I put it in front of this like painting of all different colors.
Okay.
Like the background would really like stand out. Like it's not like bright colors, but like I thought it would still look nice. So I did that. It's a kind of a blurry picture though, so it's not too good. But I also
No, it's good. It looks cool. I don't know if this is just a quality thing, but like the arm and the apple all being held there, it kind of looks like you painted it all, which is neat. But yeah, what I like about that,
it was hard to put the apple there without someone holding it, because there's no like stand there, so I had to do it. But yeah, so that's another one. I've made it a little bit darker on the background.
yeah, I like what you did there. That one's cool. I like how you changed up the background each time, because for the first one you had a lot more color in the background, which was really good, especially since like you talked about the colors kind of complemented it. So they were there, but they weren't, you could still see the apple and it stood out. But I also like that the painting kind of looks like concentric rings of circles. So even though there's a lot of color in the background, those circles all kind of led up to the apple in the first one at least. And so the apple was kind of in the center of that one circle. Which is really neat.
Notice that's a good visual. Wow.
Yeah, so it kind of leads your eye into it. And it's the same thing for the one where you had the solid blue background. You could still kind of see the circle there. And so you could see, yeah, that one. The apple is still kind of in the center. And I like how the arm that's hanging there, it's kind of going by that rule of thirds where it's up in that one corner. So the apple's still in the center, but you have something to kind of tie it down and create that kind of human influence and liveliness to it, as opposed to just an apple floating in the painting. So it looks like there's something happening there. That's really good.
Thanks. And then that's the last one. This one isn't, I feel like this one's too dark though.
That one's good. No, I like, once again, I think that one's the most centered one, where the circles actually outline how the apple is highlighted there. Let me see if I could find what I took a photo of. So I tried, just because I was curious about it, because someone had asked, I tried using the panorama effect. So what I did is, because I play guitar and I couldn't fit the whole guitar into the photo without having a lot of empty space in it. So I didn't have too much time to make up a background. But I kind of just okay, it's not. I did one photo here where what I did, I took two guitars that I have, and I tried to make up some kind of background or some kind of context. So I put the drum right there. I put the drumsticks behind it, and I tried to do a stretch where you have this one color, this bright red, or this red in the top right corner, and then you have the blue in the bottom left corner. You have these two colors that are in kind of that rule of thirds area. It's all complementing each other and creating that linear kind of leading line across it. Oh, that's another thing that I forgot to point out. The background and the arm there, all holding it, those are good examples of leading lines.
Yeah,
This
it's
wasn't
nice
work,
how
but yeah.
starting to up. It's nice how the guitars stand out in that photo.
Yeah, I feel like even though they're two very different colors, and I have the little initials that I put on it that I'll probably take off, but it all kind of leads across each other, and it creates this one kind of linear thing that looks cool. But yeah, those are
I like it.
yeah, so those are great photos. All right, I think we're at our last couple of minutes here. So if you have any last questions, that'd be a great time to ask, but that's about it for this.
I just have one more question. So portrait mode is when like the background is like blurred, and then the picture, and then like the center in the front is like more like, I don't know. Portrait mode is when make the background blurry and like the centerpiece like really standing out.
Yeah, so what
Is that
happens?
how that is on the phone?
Yeah, so what happens on iPhones or other phones, if they have it too, is it's a digital technology for the cell phones where they'll figure out digitally the outline of the subject of the photo. It's usually human, and then if there's enough distance between the camera and the person in the background, what it does is it'll figure out, some software will figure out what's in the background and it'll blur it all. So it's gotten better over the past couple of years. It used to be kind of meh, but there used to be kind of be lines, and if you look closely, you can kind of see lines where it's not quite perfect of it separating, especially around the hair, where there's little pieces of hair separating the background from the foreground. And if you're using, it's called a DSLR camera, I'll grab one right now. A camera like this, then what you could do is it doesn't do it via digital technology. You could change the aperture, which is a little hole in the camera that opens wider and wider, and it gets narrow too. So if you open it really wide, what it's going to do is it's going to let a lot of light in. When you take the photo, you're going to see the person is very in focus, but anything that's even just a little bit further behind them is going to be very blurry. So it creates that cool blurred effect that we saw with the lady holding the lights. Whereas if you make that aperture really small, you're going to have to let a lot of light in, or you're going to have to take the photo for a longer time to let enough light in to see it. But it also ends up focusing on everything, so you can see the background clearly and the foreground clearly, kind of like how my camera is seeing the wall behind me and me in focus. And also like that one image that we saw with the looking through the trees at that one mountainside with all the houses, everything there is in focus. So when you're using a DSLR camera like this, that's what they're called, you could do that not using digital technology. So it's much more accurate because it's actually a distance thing that's determining it rather than figuring out the outlines. But yeah, phones are doing a really good job at imitating it. It makes it really easy for within your own house to just take those really cool, high quality photos without having to go and buy expensive technology.
Yeah, I really like those types of photos. They're really nice. Oh,
yeah, they're
thank you.
really cool. Yeah, of course. All right. Any last questions or anything?
No, I don't think so. I don't have any more.
Okay, sounds great. Then it's great. It's 4 o'clock now, so you could go off and do whatever you want to do for the rest of the day. Stay safe and wash your
Thank
hands
you.
and everything. Yeah. All right. Goodbye.
Ben, you have a couple of comments from people. One of them was, hold on a second. Wonderful presentation, very talented kid. And another one who said that she had to hop off early, but she loved your presentation. So some people jumped off at about the time of the picture take.
Okay. Thank you.
So Ben, thank you very
Yes.
much for today. I'm
Of
just
course.
stopping the recording.